So rapid fire, we have a few questions, one word or maybe one sentence. Pretty quick. First question. We'll start with Brendan and then Dale. Brendan, what was your first car?
First car was a 1972 Mustang. Main colors were rust, Bondo, primer gray, and occasionally black, depending on which vendor I was looking at.
Wow. Dale?
I had a 1979 Volkswagen Rabbit.
Classic. Great. What was your first job after, let's say, after college? Oh, actually, first job, period. That's actually the intention.
I was a paper boy.
Camp counselor realizing that was a terrible idea.
What was the first concert you attended?
Weird Al Yankovic. It was also the last concert I attended. Been there 8 times.
Mine was Kiss.
Okay. Oh, fantastic.
In the 80s.
All right. So what do you prefer, craft beer or Oregon wine? And you can call it a label if you prefer.
I prefer craft beer.
Not much of a drinker, so I prefer craft root beer.
Fantastic.
Ooh. What about appetizers or dessert?
Dessert.
Ditto.
Hopefully you like the maple syrup. Okay, last rapid-fire question. What activity do you do outside of work or family just for yourself?
I enjoy mountain biking.
Running.
All right.
Thank you.
So again, we're talking about careers, but again, we're also people too. So conversation starters.
Thank you. So we'll start with our first question. And if you don't mind, could you take a moment to describe your organization? We'll start there.
Yeah, so Cascadia Behavioral Healthcare, we're one of the largest nonprofits in the state of Oregon. We have about 925 employees, 75 locations-ish spread throughout the Portland metropolitan area, with some in the Springfield, Eugene area. And we are primarily Medicaid, which means we're a social safety net for behavioral health care. These are folks that are diagnosed with, a Medicaid mental illness or E&D or alcohol and drug addiction. And so we service about 16,000 folks per year, and we run the entire gamut of services, and we've got a budding primary care service that we're doing as well, so we can try and do some more holistic integrated care. And with that, we run crisis services, housing, property management, and then we also operate several outpatient clinics as well. And that leads to a lot of disparate funding. This sector has, I think we have 112 different contracts, which have different strings attached to them. They may all be 97% Medicaid, but man, do they make it fun trying to track how you're actually providing these services and providing these outcomes. So it makes for a very dynamic and complex environment, especially given our current healthcare state.
Great. Thank you. And Dale?
I work for the Sisters of St. Mary of Oregon, just over 130 years old, or established 130 years ago. It's difficult to describe organization. They're involved in healthcare and education. I've heard that they have the largest K-12 educational private Catholic school system west of the Mississippi. Just over 1,000 students in our K-12 system. We have a early childhood development center, and we're also in healthcare. We have acute care systems. We have rehabilitation. We've got 2 different memory care facilities, one for more ambulatory. It's for more able-bodied people with memory care issues, and then we have a more long-term care facility for memory care as well. We have other outreach programs. The sisters teach English as a second language, as well as assist underprivileged people with attaining their GED.
Thank you. So follow-on questions, describing your role a little bit. What do you do within your organizations, and what's on your mind right now?
So at Cascadia, the role of CIO, which I know we'll get into a little bit more, is kind of evolved, and it's almost a CIOO role. In other words, Chief Information Operating Officer. The blending of data and business operations continues to happen. As we're moving past, IT is very much a utility for a lot of organizations, like electricity. Just got to work. I want my email, I want my phones, I want my other stuff to work. So when you kind of graduate past that level, which is where Cascadia is, we're trying to how can we leverage the data we have to really provide superior healthcare and of course add value, and that's really where I come in. So at my current organization, we have a small IT support team of about 8 individuals. We have about 5 individuals in what we call our business intelligence team. Think of them as data technicians, not so much data analysts. That's a different team that I've got. And then we have a small electronic health records team. This is about 4 individuals. What makes that team very unique is an electronic health record is like your central app. That is like your ERP, that is your platform, that is what drives all the care, all the business decisions, and that's what does the bulk of what we do at Cascadia. And a lot of organizations have technical folks leading that, which is great. They may be gifted, they know how to work workflows. We are very fortunate that we have folks that are also clinicians. These are folks that carry active caseloads that know how to utilize this technology and create workflows for that. So I get the privilege of working with these very talented individuals. And then lastly, I have about 45 folks that are under our operations wing. So this is like facilities management, this is front desk, a little bit of billing. It's trying to keep the client flowing in and out of the front door and trying to make it a warm and an enjoyable experience as possible.
Thank you. Dale?
Well, I don't know where to start. The role of CIO has definitely changed, I would say, with our organization. I've been there for 18 years, and the position was created when I started. So we had a number of different contractors who were providing the role and the service for our organization at the time. So as I started trying to learn as much as I could about our different organizations, but I started in '99, so you all know how technology has changed over that time. I used to, of course, do a lot of my work in the evenings and weekends, as in change management type stuff. But now you can't get away with doing those things in the evenings and weekends because pretty much everyone's always connected to their email or to everything, remote access to just about all of our services. So. I would say that the role of the CIO in our organization has really become more of a facilitator, and also I would say I find myself very involved in operations as well. If it has low voltage associated with it, then I'm there. We do a lot of construction. At least over the last 10 years, we've been doing a lot of construction, and I find myself a member of the construction team because we have to specify everything from lighting and HVAC systems to access control and locking systems. So it's an ever-changing role. It seems that especially as these mobile devices have been maturing, there's just more and more connectivity and integration.
Thank you.
You also asked what was kind of on our minds, and a lot of the time it's right now at Cascadia we're transitioning our main application, our main caregiving application to a new platform, and we go live February 1st. So that's, how do you maintain that continuity of care is a big one. And we'll get into challenges later, which are also top of mind, but that's a big one right there, and continuing to make sure that, are we truly adding value for what we're doing? Since we're primarily taxpayer funded through different mechanisms, it's our responsibility to not only those that we serve, but also the taxpayer to use the greatest efficiency with money. So those are the two things that are always top of mind is, how do I transition this organization and how do I keep adding value because I like my job.
Thank you. Dale?
What's on my mind, I was just discussing this morning about we're moving a little bit into Microsoft Hyper-V, and so I'm really enjoying some of the challenges of the differences between VMware and Hyper-V.
Thank you so much.
Great. So again, a two-part question. One is more current and then going backwards. Dale, you mentioned that the CIO position with the Sisters of St. Mary's, the position was created when you stepped into it. And I think for Brandon, it was a similar sort of role. Okay. So this is about career path. Especially looking at some of the RSVPs and the reason people were interested in talking to you, I think there are some folks in the room who want to ascend to that level. Could you talk a little bit more about the CIO positions? These are relatively new, but they can also encompass a variety of different roles. So maybe tell us a bit about how you got to this level. That's the first part. The second part is maybe later on, talk about the career trajectory. How did you get to this position? What were some of those earlier steps? But maybe in whatever order you prefer.
I was going to say maybe a reverse order for me.
Sure.
I worked at U.S. Bank for most of the 90s, and I actually started as an accountant. My undergrad's in physics, and I really enjoyed playing with computers as a kid and growing up and so forth. But it wasn't until I was an accountant, until I got my hands back on computers again and really started working in programming, and I just gravitated to that part of a commercial real estate division at U.S. Bank, and before I knew it, I was on the IT team, and we were breaking ground in the Windows realm. I mean, we're talking Windows 3.1 and NetWare 4, so the good old days, and we were trying to develop desktop applications to replace those mainframe apps that everyone thought were going to be gone, which of course are all still very healthy and doing well. And as I worked through different positions at the bank, I found myself as an enterprise project manager at the Oregon Operational Support Group. And that's when I started with the AIM program. I thought it looked like a really excellent program, had a really diverse portfolio of offering, and I thought that it would help build my knowledge in the industry, and this occupation of the CIO was kind of a new concept at the time too. So that I set that as my goal, my direction that I wanted to achieve, and then I think a lot of it comes with a little bit of luck and who you know, and just opportunity. I graduated in '98, and like I say, I found an opportunity working at the Sisters in '99, and a lot of that has to do with who you know. And I happened to, my sister worked for the Sisters at the time, and she had worked with a colleague who was the CFO of the Sisters of St. Mary of Oregon. And they were looking, like I say, to find someone who could kind of pull all of the IT needs of the different corporations together and offer the support that the campus needed. So I really jumped at that opportunity. First, I was asked to kind of define the position and help them understand the total portfolio of what's involved in an IT department. And so once I kind of built the framework for them, I think they offered the position to someone else, but eventually found the opportunity in my lap, so I took it, jumped at it.
Brenton?
Great. My career trajectory, I started off, I wanted to be a physical therapist, and until I realized after 400 hours of inpatient and outpatient volunteering in my undergrad, I'm like, wow, this is really hard, and I don't like this stuff. So I'd always played with technology as a kid, but never really messed around with it. I didn't build my first computer till I was 18 at the end of my freshman year of college. And after that, I'm like, it's kind of fun. So through college, I was building computers and just selling them on the side, and that's what paid for all my extracurricular activities. So I ended up graduating with a BS in speech communications from Portland State. And I'm just like, all right, what do I do for a living? What now? And a friend of mine was like, why don't you go into IT? You like computers and you can talk. As you've noticed, I'm caffeinated and I talk often and at great length and at great speed. And so I figured, sure, why not? So I ended up utilizing my network. I ended up in Seattle working a level 1 help desk job just as the dot-com bubble was bursting. It burst. They let go of all the developers but kept me because I was the cheapest. So survived it there for a few years while we transitioned, and then wanted to relocate back to Portland. So this is in the early 2000s, relocated back to Portland, got a job as an IT lead for a bunch of title insurance companies in Southwest Washington. And as that started progressing and I started getting more staff, I'm like, wow, this leadership thing's kind of cool. I mean, I get to work with all these great people and we're doing really cool stuff. I need to formalize this. So I spent a couple of months taking some more undergrad classes in the mid-2000s, and then I discovered the AIM program. And I'm like, no, this is something that's going to help, give me an additional tool set that I need. I've attained some professional Microsoft certifications, but I was lacking that kind of, I learn well with colleagues, and, I need to have my hands on it. And so I'm like, a working degree I can actually do and learn how to become a better IT leader and learn more about business, sign me up. So that's where I started that program. I ended up actually met Travis Lucky, being good friends with that and good colleagues. I met Kara, who was one of my instructors as well. And that allowed me to apply, direct leadership skills in a business context in technology. And we were doing stuff in title insurance that nobody was doing at the time, at least in Southwest Washington. Well, then the real estate bubble burst, and I found myself going from 11 offices to 4 in a matter of 6 months, and then to help desk. So all the teams were done. So, slight consolidation. So I ended up jumping ship and going to become an IT manager at a pest control company, which was a difference, it's heavily linked to agriculture and a few other things. Continued to learn, finished up my AIM degree after a brief hiatus. And after that, I realized this IT leadership track is still a lot of fun. Got to Cascadia a few years later, and it was just fortunate enough that it lined up, and I ended up in healthcare. And, I've bounced around to a few different industries. I've always been consulting on the side. And when they allowed me to be their IT director, it was really to kind of fix their broken IT department. It's not that their IT department was broken. It was just really under-resourced. And I turned a 75% turnover organization to a 5%. And I've still got most of my original team 6.5 years later. These are great people. And as we continue doing that, just as I got over with that, Travis Lucky and I were like, I think we need even more business education. So we're like, all right, let's go for our executive MBA. So we each went off to our respective schools, and I came back and started applying more strategy to my decisions. And when I finished with that degree, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, Cascadia, you guys are awesome. Fundamentally, we're a data company. Everything we do, everything billing, everything care-wise, gets recorded digitally. So fundamentally, okay, we've got to figure out how to take this data. We know we're reporting it to our payers and funders anyway, but it's all disparate. It's all over the place. I believe we need a chief information officer role that can kind of see the whole strategic horizon, somebody that's got that background and that can see all the different pieces, and we need to consolidate all of our data assets under one envelope, and let's really, because they wanted to utilize it, they just couldn't. And so after about 1.5 years of negotiating, it was a long period, we came to an agreement and created the CIO role for me. And then, of course, 3 months later, they threw operations at me when they realized how close operations is tied to technology. So that's kind of this is the abbreviated version of getting to where I'm at and creating the CIO role at Cascadia for better data visibility.
That's absolutely fantastic. More conversation during breaks and after the event. So as someone who's a career counselor at heart, I wanted to call out a couple of things. The value of networking, the value of, being present and then connecting and learning, and the fact that, awesome career success also tends to come with very meandering routes, so it's not direct. So, even though as people graduate, they think, oh my gosh, I've got to have my act together, I love the fact that you're sharing examples of, sometimes you find an organization that you can grow in a straight line, other times you just bounce around and you find life, and then success finds you. So, thank you for these insights. I think at this point, just to change it up a little bit, Sarah and I still have additional questions, but we don't want you to be sitting there for another 15 minutes with a burning question. So I'd love to take maybe one or two, and I'll run around and be Phil Donahue for those who remember him. But let me pass the microphone around.
Thanks, Phil. You look different. Question for Brandon. You mentioned you're going through a big transition in a month or so. It sounds like you're going to do that all at once. Are you going to do any incremental sort of transition as part of that? Yeah.
No worries. Yeah. There's the old adage, if you're going to fail fast, fail often, but fail smart, the kind of Google thing. For us, when you're moving electronic health records, unfortunately, it's really difficult to do an incremental change, because if you're lucky, if you have segmented business, Sunny Sanfro's right here, CIO, former CIO with Tuality, has lots of experience with this. As you're moving forward with these large changes, it's kind of like a Band-Aid. Am I pulling it off quick, or am I pulling it off slow? And for Cascadia, because our billing is so intertwined with, even though 112 different funding mechanisms, all of our care models are so intertwined with the technology, there's no way we could do a phased implementation. We have to do this all at once. So generally, I prefer a phased implementation with nice incremental change. When we migrated to Office 365, that's a perfect example. Little changes come here, we can turn little features on, and we can, kind of help add and enhance the business. Power BI is a great tool for adding enhanced dashboards and data for our folks. But this system, I got smart and I outsourced this. I was not going to do all of this internally, so we found some consultants that specify, that are specific to behavioral healthcare, electronic medical record changes, and we've been bringing them in, and they've been helping us make sure we're keeping the vendor honest, we're keeping ourselves honest, and we have clearly stated contracts. So it's a one system shock. Exactly. Yes.
I have to say I feel very fortunate to have education and healthcare both under the same umbrella. Sometimes it's a very frustrating, difficult thing because teachers expect to have just kind of full administrative control of their computers. That's kind of a typical thing in education, but I have to say with the onset of a lot of more modern viruses and ransomware and so forth, I'm really glad that I've never allowed that in our educational environment. But it gives us kind of a place to test things that we're going to be using campus-wide. And so I tend to use the educational side of things as our kind of test bed before we start moving into healthcare, because kind of like Brandon, we can't dispense medication without technology. We can print off paper records and go there, but we never have. And I'm trying to think, we've probably been electronic. We were one of the first long-term care in our industry to go fully electronic. I'd say probably about 10 years ago. I can't honestly remember. We started using a system called Care Tracker, and I think I'm about ready to take it offline because we have to maintain those records for 10 years. But anyhow, that's kind of our method of implementation. I use when I'm going to be making changes to our wireless environment, because all of our med carts and everything are wireless dispensing of medication. The changes often happen in our educational environment first, and then slowly migrate the changes over toward healthcare.
So I found it interesting when you were talking about data and big data and driving analytics and business decisions now. Could you speak a little bit to see how you see that in the future? Because obviously IT is getting now more of a seat in the boardroom with with the business development people. And whether instead of coming on the back end of new products or new ideas, to now be included as to how to help that. How do you see that? Do you see that progressing faster rate? I mean, is artificial intelligence a part of that? Those all topics.
Yes. No, and I'm borrowing from some of my virtual information executive colleagues on this one who have kind of visualized, Mark Hallquist visualized an IT pyramid. Your baseline being that utility model you heard me saying. The second kind of tier is a nice little kind of using IT and data and leadership is kind of a, pulling those strategic drivers a little bit, but it's still kind of a, finding it. And then that top tier is exactly what you described, which is kind of utilizing an IT in the boardroom, IT in the executive room, because it's really a blending. There's no such thing as an IT problem. They're all business problems. Anybody who says it's an IT problem, I have a problem with that because it's got to align with the business if you're not providing value. And big data and artificial intelligence, I mean, you can rent Watson now for a few hours. There's different leverages that you can do with AWS. That's been a game changer for us, and we've already fallen behind the curve. We were one of the first behavioral nonprofits to actually do something like this, and we utilized our charity pricing like you can't believe. I get great pricing from Microsoft because 501c3, nonprofit charity, you're damn right, I'm going to use every dollar I can squeeze. And we were able to do some great analytics. Now already, though, because of the leverage of cloud analytics and a few other pieces, my on-premise stuff is already considered archaic. It's only 3 years old. And so there are already, we call it co-opetition. We have a lot of sister nonprofits that we compete for the same patient and consumer pool, yet at the same time, they're able to they got into the game a little bit later, and they are already in the cloud, moving data back and forth with these large data sets. They've hired data statisticians, scientists. We've hired our first to really try and utilize and start building business cases and risk reduction models for this. And you're right, large data sets is the only way this is going to work. I'll give you one final example for healthcare. Sonny knows about this. It's called EDDI. It's the Emergency Department Event Notification System. And every single emergency department in the state of Oregon is hooked up to this notification system. And so all the ED docs could see all the different notifications and could see, all right, has this person hit? A lot of ED utilizers drive up healthcare costs, and they're some of the largest expense to our overall healthcare system. And unfortunately, a lot of those are Cascadia clients. And so very recently, we started getting access to this data. This has been a game changer for us. We can actually see when our people are hitting the ED, whereas before it was just a complete crapshoot. And we are using that and leveraging some analytics, and trying to build a much more holistic picture of their primary care, of their pain medications, of their, behavioral health care records, and really trying to see, can we reduce their risk and provide quality care? Without these large data sets and analytic tools, this would have been impossible. And because of the price point, we couldn't afford it. Now I can just rent this for a few hours and spin up a few resources in the cloud and let somebody smarter than me do all this. It's great.
For us, I'd say one of the most intriguing things we're working with right now is WSU has a Vancouver program, what would you call it, a satellite school, and they're in our organization monitoring some of our memory care residents with smart home equipment. It has everything from proximity sensors, motion detectors, all kinds of very intelligent methods and means of monitoring residents with memory care, and they're going to start offering stimulus to see if they can alter the behavior or better understand the behavior. So it's really kind of an intriguing science, a new method of us gathering data and trying to understand memory care from that perspective, what data can do for us to help alter behavior or understand their behavior.
The phrase, IT problems are business problems. So true.
Thanks again for this. You're both associated with nonprofit organizations. And historically, nonprofit organizations have had some turnover issues because people may be very dedicated to your cause. But ultimately, the for-profit channel or a corporation that can offer them more money or more benefits or more something intervenes. So the question is, how are you getting and retaining people, and what kind of things are you offering to them so that they stay in the nonprofit channel for a long period of time versus taking the fork in the road?
For me, I just think it's people just generally like to work with me. I was supposed to be funny. No, honestly, my first employee, she worked with me for 18 years. And just recently moved to Eugene. I had another employee for about 7 or 8 years, and he was my second hire. And I think that it's just generally speaking, we have a very positive and comfortable working environment. Try to keep people happy, and I can't offer the competitive pay like you've mentioned, but we do have stability. I'd say the one thing about the sisters, we've been here 130 years, and I would expect that they'll be around a lot longer, especially considering the future site that they have and the leadership that we have. So I think that there's several things that we can offer our employees. Flexibility. We're a 24/7 operation, and so it's helpful to have people who are a boss who's willing to let people go do what they need to do during the day, and then I enjoy their support on weekends and evenings and things like that. So I think that's the best thing, is just being an understanding employer. Also, I'd say that I try to help people enrich their lives or expand their knowledge base. We have such a diverse environment that there's plenty of opportunity to challenge and explore. We've got such a broad variety of things that we're doing that if there's one area that someone wants to learn more about, I'm happy to hand that over to them and let them delve deeper into it. So I think that's another opportunity, helping to develop people's skills.
Yeah, and I can echo a lot of that. That's been one of our biggest strategic drivers. So in the last 2 years, retention was one of our largest focus. And even though we're nonprofit, doesn't mean we're not profitable or revenue surplus, and that was the thing. Always have to maintain a revenue surplus. And so at Cascadia, I can give these numbers. These are public figures. We had 35% annual turnover. And in the behavioral healthcare nonprofit sector, that's actually considered kind of normal depending on which source you use, like IBIS World Report. We got that down to 24%, and we're still on the way, and we're still going down. And how we did that is we did a couple of market corrections. So a lot of our salaries in our line of work, our contracts, it's not like I can just pass my cost on to the consumer and say, hey, I'm paying for a COLA, cost of living adjustment. We have to lobby, and then we have to renegotiate with a lot of our government and a lot of our payer stakeholders. And this is a long, drawn-out process. So we brought a lot of our staff up to their private market. Their nonprofit market. Now, admin, though, has been different. The administrator, which of course is the bulk of what I do. So we offer a mix of a great, PTO package, incredibly flexible, very generous. And also I try and offer as much variety and encouragement for education, as much variety for applying this knowledge at Cascadia as possible. If you've got an innovative solution, let's try something. It gets kind of to the earlier question, transitioning the organization all at once is this one instance, but I like to prototype stuff and have fun with it. And we've spent a great deal of time just kind of keeping focus on that. The key to a lot of this, though, is communication. And we have really fundamentally kind of worked in our communication department to try and make sure at 75 locations, 24/7 for 30 of them, how do we get the message out? And okay, so you can have a centralized intranet that everybody logs into. Yay, Mazel Tov, have a cookie. It's really keeping that face-to-face communication going and really engaging. I have never been in more meetings than I am now in the C-suite. That's one of the downsides. I don't get out nearly enough, but when I do, I'm able to make contact and describe what our strategic plan is. Keep people motivated about the mission. This is why we're here, letting them know what we're actually doing. That helps kind of just making people feel connected, helps keep the turnover low. And the last thing we do is when we make sure we're hiring an admin, we make sure we're hiring people that are mission aligned with us. I don't want somebody that's going to work at the front desk for 3 months and then leave for Fred Meyer's because they're going to get paid $1.50 more an hour. I need somebody that is understanding that these are folks that are needing help, underserved populations. And it makes our hiring process times drag out a lot longer than any of us would like, and increases the stress in some of our clinicians and folks. But because we're making sure we're hiring for culture and fit, not just for right now.
I would echo that as well. I think we're a customer service department, and so really, if our customers is basically anyone and everyone, and from visitors to our campus, we have guest wireless network, for example, or our residents in the rooms. I think that I look for people who are motivated by making other people happy, and so people who have critical thinking skills, but also really enjoy making people happy. And I tell my folks, I'm not somebody who's really a by the punch clock kind of person. As long as everyone feels that their needs are addressed and we're taking good care of everyone's needs, then I'm really don't have much care what they do when they're in their office. I just want to make sure that everyone and these people are motivated by the pat on the back and the thanks. And it's rare that an IT department really gets much pat on the back. It's kind of like a custodian or some other support role. People don't realize when things are working, right? They only know when they're not. And but I have to say, we oftentimes do get those emails that say, "Hey, Dale, I just want to thank you again, because every time I turn on my computer, it works. The internet's always there. Whenever I press the print button, things come off, and you keep things mechanically and electrically, everything's working." So anyway, we do get those emails on occasion, but mostly I like to award and recognize employees for their contribution to the department, and I often like to praise them in front of whether it's the rest of the executive team or just whomever for their contributions.
Great. So if you have other questions, we'll have time at the end, but let's continue with our final couple of questions.
Yeah, perfect. And in fact, it's a good segue. You talked about some of the challenges that you're facing in terms of retention of employees, in terms of systems or processes that are getting outdated quickly. What other challenges can you describe that you're currently facing?
For us, it's identifying where our risk lies right now. So in nonprofit healthcare, we're heavily tied to the ACA, the Affordable Care Act. And so with a lot of changes that have been talked about and changes, that means our funding streams are having to shift. And we're seeing a lot of challenges in how and where we can provide service. Whether you agree with it, pro, con, or different is not the point. The point is, it is affecting our funding quite a bit. So, which means we have to make some strategic decisions. In strategy, you can only do 4 things. So you can either decide to attain new market share, which we're kind of working towards, sustain what you got, which is one thing, retain if you've lost anything, or what I jokingly call degain, which is get the hell out of the business. And for us right now, we've decided to really focus on our main challenge is called integration. And we're doing it in a way called reverse integration. So a lot of organizations, primary care, hospitals and such, as more care is kind of shifting to the outpatient world, they are looking at ways to, how do they keep their patients engaged, especially when they're hitting their EDs. And so they're offering more behavioral healthcare services, which has been our traditional spot. And we can traditionally do it cheaper, on about a quarter of the price of many primary care. That's because our rates don't change that often. Well, our challenge has been like, let's start doing more primary care services ourselves as in behavioral healthcare. Instead of just putting a behavioral healthcare clinician in a hospital and just saying, okay, you're co-located and just go see a social worker if you're in an emergency department having an issue. We're trying to actually monitor the co-occurring conditions like your diabetes, your hypertension, your blood pressure level, all of these different things that folks with behavioral healthcare who die 20 years earlier than your average citizen do. That is our main focus right now. Is like, how can we continue to wrap around that healthcare? And with all that, that's data. I mean, that is just data in and out, and that's analytics. That's like capturing all that information, sharing that information with hospitals, getting that information from other healthcare networks and other claims data. It is a massive amount of information we're trying to work with on a shoestring budget, and that has been our main challenge, is how do we continue to provide good quality care for those we serve, the taxpayer.
Thank you. Dale?
I'd say the biggest concern that I've had for the last several years has been information security. I know everyone keeps hearing about everything from Experian to, I guess it started probably with Target about 5 years ago, and then I'm not sure, Home Depot and a few others. Just trying to keep information private. And HIPAA is another concern, just about those med carts in the hallways, and how do we, keep private healthcare, protected healthcare information from the public eye, just things like that. So I think traditional methods of using firewalls and virus protection, signature files is just kind of, it works to some degree, but times have changed, and there's, with the spear phishing attacks and things like that, we need to make our users the first line of defense to prevent them from downloading, executing, clicking on links, opening emails that they shouldn't, and things like that. So been doing a lot of training recently, sending specialized phishing attacks from a third party into our employees and trying to educate them on email security awareness, things like that.
Great, thank you.
There's a lot of information going around that you have to manage, that you have to be aware of. Artificial intelligence was brought up, big data was brought up, security, all those other things. Can you talk a little bit about how you sort of stay on top of things, and particularly where you get support from peers, whether it's official mentors who you go to for counsel? How do you stay on top of it all? But how do you make sure you're not alone in a sea of changing tides?
Well, I have to say, Steve Knebel was another graduate of our program, and he was we overlapped. I think he was graduated a year or so after I did in the AIM program, but he found himself at Easy Street, which became Atmosera, for a short period of time, where we kind of crossed paths. Have crossed paths in a few other places, but keeping connection with those people who you know and trust and have a lot of knowledge. When he tells me, "Hey, Dale, you got to meet this guy. He's just a brilliant consultant who just has knowledge like you wouldn't believe." I'm happy to bring in anyone that he would recommend to me, and so I think I learn a lot from having consultants in, and oftentimes I'll ask them to stand over my shoulder and let me execute the work while they kind of feed my brain and help me understand. It's one thing to read a book or take an online course or something, but to actually have some hands-on experience and exposure. The other thing is, if something's going to break, if I'm the one that implemented it, I feel a lot more confident fixing it myself. And I like to have that ability in my control rather than a phone number to call when something's haywire, having problems, whatever. So I think learning is, staying abreast of things is reading my favorite blogs, and like I say, security's been a big thing for me, so I follow a lot of security blogs, and then just keeping in touch with people like Brandon and Steve Knebel and things like that, and aware of where industry changes are going. I like to ask and probe. For people who get to hop around and visit a lot of other environments, I like to ask them, "Hey, what are you seeing? What's a new trend? What's going on?" This is a struggle I'm having with everything from deploying Windows or endpoint updates or whatever, and gleaning information from them.
Great, thank you. Brandon?
For me, it's making sure that I'm still doing what I'm passionate about. I'm passionate about technology. I'm passionate about providing solutions. And so that comes from, networking a lot quite often. That's with peers. I network quite often with Travis Lucky. We're always bouncing ideas off each other. I have a cadre of mentors that I keep in contact with. Sonny Sapper has been very good at career advice for me. Manoj Garg has been another one that's helped me along the way. And it's really, you won't always keep the same folks throughout your whole life, but it's really kind of finding those people that have done what I want to do, and how did you do it, and engaging in those two-way relationships, because there's a lot of people that are willing to share that information. They want to help you. All you got to do is ask, though. And I think combining that with continual, I never stop learning. I'm in a CIO course right now, because why stop? I'm taking some ITIL foundations. Why stop? If you stop in this industry, you're done. And it's not even just industry, just in technology in general. It's changing too fast. Understand business concepts, but you got to stay abreast of it. And then all kinds of publications, from CIO.com to, even Slashdot, to the dark pages of Reddit. There's still some really good stuff in there. And it's just kind of keeping multifaceted, approach. And just as long as you're passionate about it, generally good information, good people will follow.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, the last question that James and I have for you, and then we'll turn it to you guys if you have additional questions, hopefully, would be what advice would you give to someone who wants to ascend to the executive level in an organization?
You've heard the word multiple times, networking. Don't be afraid to network. Kind of talk with people, see how they did that. Seek people out that have kind of done what you want to do, or just generally engage in network. What have you got to lose? The worst thing anybody can say is no. Okay, great. So that's one of the biggest pieces. Also, you heard me mention before, getting a mentor. And that was probably, I spent 10 years before I did that. And I think I should have done that 10 years prior. I didn't do that until the late 2000s. And I had missed a lot of opportunities along the way. And it was great to really pick somebody's knowledge who could provide guidance along the way. And, successful leaders build successful teams. So if you're looking to aspire to that, remember, it's okay to hire people that are smarter than you in their functional area. It's okay. You want to make those connections with folks that really are kind of passionate with what they do and build those teams. And if you can, take those teams with you wherever you go. I've done that a few times. And, our job is to make it so that other people can do their job, and the foundation of that is a shared vision that aligns with the company. So if the company wants to maintain #1 market share in financial services and you're really passionate about providing that, great. That makes sure, what is your leadership vision? How are you in your functional area going to increase efficiency in operations? Are you going to increase sales and new accounts? What is your functional area? Make sure that if you're passionate. And if you don't know what that is, well, it's good to get with a mentor who can walk you through what your 30, 10, and 5-year plans are too to help you get there.
Yeah, I would say be willing to take risks and, projects that you might feel might be above you, but if you have mentors and other people that are available resources to you, I still stay in touch with many people I worked with at U.S. Bank. They've gone on to jobs in other places, and I still keep in touch, and they are very inspiring people. My former bosses, I really enjoy. They keep joking. Some of them, I want to come work for you someday, Dale. So, but I still look to them and for motivation, and they're just great contacts also just to have for, like we were talking about, sharing notes. I think other important things, like I say, taking on those projects, taking risks. Stepping outside of your comfort zone, like sitting up on the stage today. I think the only things that I speak to 80 sisters. I was joking with someone earlier saying, and I put them to sleep, once a year. They have what they call community days, and I get to come in and speak with the sisters and explain to them what their IT organization is doing for their umbrella of corporations. And I try to keep it somewhat lighthearted and exciting for them because I know that the nitty-gritty really isn't what they want to hear. But also the networking. It's who you know. I think that really does a lot. Yeah, and just being willing to work hard.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful. So we have a few minutes for more questions from the audience. I'll walk around with the microphone.
Hi. So I work in change management in a consulting firm. I do a lot of technology projects, but from the people side. So I was curious to get your feedback on kind of that front. One of the things I think we're seeing is technology is becoming more commoditized. It's possible to develop offshore with much cheaper programmers, and there's a lot of off-the-shelf systems that get you about 80% of the way there. And where we see a gap is that leadership piece and interfacing with the business and actually taking, for instance, you talk about big data and analytics and stuff, but the people at the other end have no idea how to use those tools effectively, or maybe not how to see the future all the time. So I'm wondering if you could comment. What we see in some IT departments is they're trying to take that leadership role, but people skills, business interface is not classic IT department strength. So it's something, a competency that they're having to build. I'm wondering if you see something similar or maybe how you're addressing that.
Oh, yeah. We're definitely seeing something. That's why I kind of mentioned that IT pyramid, trying to move beyond the base utility model. And a lot of IT organizations are trying to bridge that gap into, let's be honest, your average help desk, doesn't truly exist. You've outsourced to a managed service provider in a lot of instances, or keep well, do well, keep internal what you do well and outsource the rest. And as IT is trying to move into more of that strategy role, there is the need for more folks that we call them business analysts in the classic sense. Well, they're kind of IT business analysts. They're the ones that can see all the different data components and tie them together. And that's where I'm seeing the largest focus right now is that transition. Is how do you turn what used to be a traditional support role, as your password need to be reset, to okay, well I'm noticing that at 3 a.m. we're having a spike in intakes, and it looks like it's because blah blah blah. Somebody who can analyze different data sets, and a lot of technicians actually surprisingly have an analytical mind as well. So how does a company manage that transition and that culture and that shifting of service to increase value? And that's where I'm noticing the biggest growing pains, as how do we create these dashboards and these visualizations and bring the information that's needed to the business decision makers. And so, if I can give you more specific examples, but that's really kind of the focus right there. So I think most small to medium enterprises, that's really the challenge right now, is how to continue that transition and not fall flat and hand over too much responsibility to IT.
I concur. I think that's the biggest difficulty is between. I think the base skill of the end user has come up so much over the last 20 years that there's just the expectation of higher level thinking, knowledge, and the bridging of the gap between systems, people, machines. That's the expectant role in our department. I think is that we have to be critical thinkers and look for solutions as opposed to just fixing or band-aiding or keeping things working. It's and there's so I don't know how to explain it. There's so many products. There's so many vendors. There's so much out there. It's really difficult to find solutions sometimes. The best solution might be evading you for so long until you can finally identify it. And to be a trendsetter or somebody who's ahead of, it's like you can't call another long-term care provider and say, hey, what are you doing for this if they're not there yet? And so I think that was, we were kind of trend-setting in many areas. And it's really funny, I heard you say something to the regard that, when you're out there first, you might be using a technology because that was all that was available. Let's say, I know that in some third world countries, for example, their cellular networks eclipsed ours for a while because they didn't have the hardwired infrastructure in place. And so they went from 0 to 60 immediately. They were able to adopt the technologies that were available or emerging, let's say in the United States, but we were still trying to gain value out of the old infrastructure that was installed, and so our carriers weren't so excited about spending that kind of resource on upgrading and replacing the equipment. So now we need to make the next leap because there's now apps available on tablets and so forth, but perhaps our partners want us to use the Edge browser or Internet Explorer or whatever. That ties our hands a little bit as to can we use a Chromebook for that, or could we use an iPad and so forth. So we're trying to encourage the partners that we work with to develop apps that are available on like the iPad and things like that. So the battery life is longer, they have fewer security vulnerabilities. Just those are the types of things, bridging the gap between end user, device, and our data.
Okay, Karen.
Brandon, you touched on this a little bit. Things are changing so rapidly in IT. What do you turn to keep current? What kinds of periodicals, resources, blogs do you turn to? And you as well, Dale.
To reiterate some of the parts, it's funny. I keep track of a lot of pop culture blogs because they always talk about technology in this. So Slashdot, still one of my staples, has been for 10, 15 years. And I continue CIO.com. Kelly publishes, blog articles fairly regularly that are really good, thought-provoking, journals of information, technology, and science. I catch a lot of those. The MIT Sloan School produces a lot of really, really good material. Gartner, when they produce, when you can afford it, produces a lot of really, really good material. And, I still utilize the Duck and other school libraries for my alumni access and other academic databases because you never know what's out there. There's usually a solution to a business problem might actually have an academic article that's close to it. And with so much search engine capability, I mean, that's where I spend a lot of my time when I need to research, is in that kind of thing. And then, of course, I call Travis up in a panic and I say, what do I do in X, Y, and Z? I think, did I do that last week? Was that last week? I think so, yeah. I got 5 minutes. What do I do for this? So that's, playing catch up by picking my peers' brains as well.
I like being spoon-fed, so I just watch a couple of YouTube channels, and I think I also like, there's LinkedIn. I like following some of the channels on LinkedIn because it pulls together a good variety of material. So I'd say those are my two biggest methods of kind of trying to stay abreast of what's going on, what's changing.
Yeah, I second the LinkedIn thing.
Great.
Speeding.
I want to wrap up so that there's at least a few more minutes for you all to mix and mingle before we have to rush back to work at 9. A couple of announcements, if I could. First, huge thank you to Dale, Brandon, and Sarah for helping to facilitate this really cutting-edge conversation. So please join me in thanking them.